What the hell are you doing to my daughter?
For 4 agonizing years, the little girl clawed at her right ear in silence. It was a compulsion, a desperate gesture that went unnoticed by the world's most expensive doctors. Every specialist from Massachusetts Eye and Ear to Munich's prestigious clinic said the exact same thing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cleary. The damage is sensorineural. It's irreversible." Her father, Mark Cleary, a tech billionaire worth $3.2 billion, spent a fortune chasing hope across 3 continents, begging specialists to look again. They all delivered their diagnoses with clinical sympathy and handed him 6-figure bills. Then an underpaid nanny drowning in student debt noticed something Harvard and Johns Hopkins missed, and what she pulled out of that child's ear will restore your faith in human intuition. The penthouse on Fisher Island's 47th floor existed in a state of permanent, expensive silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Biscayne Bay, where yachts cut through turquoise water in soundless elegance. Inside, $12 million worth of carefully curated art hung on walls designed by an architect who'd won awards Mark couldn't pronounce. A Rothko, 2 Basquiats, a small Monet his late wife had loved. The morning light hit the abstract canvases just right, creating shadows that shifted like accusations across the Italian marble floors. Mark Cleary stood at those windows every morning at 5:47 a.m., coffee in hand, watching his daughter through the reflection in the glass. Cheryl sat cross-legged on the living room carpet, building an elaborate tower from wooden blocks. Her small fingers, working with the focused precision of a 7-year-old who lived in a world where sound didn't exist. She didn't hum while she played. She didn't sing nonsense songs or make the explosion noises most children her age made when knocking down their creations. She just built in silence, occasionally touching her right ear with that same gesture she'd made 10,000 times before. Mark had built an empire on pattern recognition. At 28, he'd identified a gap in mobile payment processing that everyone else had dismissed as unsolvable. By 32, his fintech platform was processing $847 million in transactions daily. By 35, he'd sold the company to a consortium of banks for $2.1 billion and started a new venture in blockchain verification. Forbes estimated his current net worth at $3.2 billion. He could identify market trends 6 months before they emerged, predict regulatory shifts with uncanny accuracy, and see opportunities in data that looked like noise to everyone else. But he couldn't fix his daughter. The guilt lived in his chest like something physical, something with weight and teeth. Elena had died bringing Cheryl into the world, a stroke during delivery that the doctors said was unforeseeable, unpredictable, just one of those terrible things that happen. But Mark knew the truth. He'd been in Singapore closing a deal when Elena went into labor 3 weeks early. He'd been on a conference call when she hemorrhaged. He'd been negotiating terms when their daughter took her first breath and Elena took her last. For 3 years, Cheryl had been perfect. A bright, chattering child who sang off key and asked endless questions and called him daddy with a voice that sounded exactly like Elena's. Then one day, a Tuesday in March, he remembered it with the clarity of trauma. She'd come home from her exclusive Coral Gables preschool and stopped responding to sound. Just like that. As if someone had flipped a switch. At first, they thought she was playing a game. Then they thought it was an ear infection. Then they thought it was temporary, stress-related, psychological. By the end of that first week, when Cheryl didn't respond to her name being shouted or to a door slamming behind her, Mark had her in the office of Miami's top pediatric ENT. That doctor had been the first of many, the first of an endless parade of specialists with prestigious credentials and confident voices who examined his daughter, ran their tests, reviewed their scans, and delivered variations of the same devastating verdict. Dr. Heinrich Volker at Munich's renowned clinic had been the most thorough. Mark had flown Cheryl and 2 nannies across the Atlantic on his private jet, booked an entire floor of the Bayerischer Hof, and spent 3 days watching German efficiency dissect his daughter's condition with clinical precision. Volker himself, a man whose resume included royalty and heads of state, had performed the final examination, peering into Cheryl's ears with instruments that looked like they belonged in a museum of medical history. "Herr Cleary," Volker had said in his precise, accented English, "I have examined the audiometric tests, the tympanometry results, the MRI scans, and the CT imaging. I have also performed my own otoscopic examination. The diagnosis is consistent across all findings: sensorineural hearing loss of unknown etiology. The damage appears to be at the level of the auditory nerve or the cochlea itself. Such damage is, unfortunately, irreversible with current medical technology. Mark had leaned forward in the consultation room's leather chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. What if we tried stem cell therapy? Gene therapy? I've read about experimental treatments. Yeah, there are experimental protocols, but they are designed for specific genetic conditions or recent acoustic trauma. Your daughter's case presents no clear cause, no genetic markers, no history of noise exposure or ototoxic medication. Without understanding the mechanism of damage, we cannot design an intervention. Volker had paused, his expression professionally sympathetic. I am very sorry. Sometimes the body presents us with mysteries we cannot yet solve. The bill had been $87,000 for 3 days of testing that confirmed what every other doctor had already said. Massachusetts eye and ear had been even more expensive. Mark had taken Cheryl to Boston in February when the city was frozen in gray and met with a team of specialists who wore the kind of confidence that came from working at one of the world's premier research hospitals. They discussed experimental stem cell consultations, theoretical protocols, cutting-edge research being done in cochlear regeneration. The lead researcher, Dr. Patricia Huang, had shown Mark slides of mouse cochlea regrowing hair cells in laboratory conditions. The challenge, Dr. Huang had explained, her laser pointer dancing across images Mark didn't fully understand, is translating these results to human patients. And even if we could regenerate cochlear hair cells, we'd need to know that's where the damage is located. Your daughter's imaging suggests the damage may be at the nerve level, which is far more complex to address. But there's a chance? Mark had asked. There's always a chance, Mr. Cleary. Medical science advances every day. But I want to be honest with you. Based on what we're seeing, I would estimate the probability of restoring your daughter's hearing with current technology at less than 5%. And that's being optimistic. The experimental stem cell consultation, which had involved no actual treatment, just theoretical discussion and preliminary blood work, had cost $125,000. Mark had written the check without blinking. The celebrity audiologist in Los Angeles had been a different kind of disappointment. Dr. Marcus Chen worked with musicians, with actors, with people whose careers depended on perfect hearing. His clinic in Beverly Hills looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility, all white leather and indirect lighting, and assistants who looked like models. Chen himself had the kind of practiced charisma that made Mark immediately distrustful. Mr. Cleary, Chen had said, settling into a chair across from Mark, while Cheryl played with noise-canceling headphones in the corner. I've worked with some of the biggest names in entertainment. When Beyoncé had that scare with tinnitus, I was the one who saved her hearing. When that drummer from the Red Hot Chili Peppers blew out his eardrums, I got him back on stage in 6 weeks. Can you help my daughter? Mark had asked, cutting through the celebrity name-dropping. Chen's smile had dimmed slightly. I can fit her with the most advanced assistive devices available. Custom neuro-hearing aids that interface directly with the auditory cortex using bone conduction and neural stimulation to bypass damaged pathways. They're experimental, cutting edge. I've had remarkable results with partial hearing loss. She has total hearing loss. Then we'll need to be realistic about expectations. But Mr. Cleary, with your resources, we can give your daughter the best possible quality of life. These devices will allow her to perceive sound in ways that traditional hearing aids can't match. The custom neuro-hearing devices had cost $45,000. Cheryl had worn them for 3 weeks before Mark realized they were just very expensive hearing aids that didn't work on someone with no hearing to amplify. Chen's follow-up emails suggested adjustment sessions at $8,000 per visit. Mark had stopped responding to those emails. 4 years of this. 4 years of consultations and scans and blood draws and hearing tests where Cheryl sat in soundproof booths, raising her hand when she was supposed to hear tones she couldn't hear. 4 years of watching his daughter's face as doctors spoke to her in voices she couldn't perceive, explaining tests she didn't understand. 4 years of sign language tutors and speech therapists and special education consultants. 4 years of watching her touch that right ear with the same persistent, compulsive gesture, as if she was trying to dig something out that no one else could see. The nannies couldn't handle it. Mark had gone through 4 in 2 years. They all started with enthusiasm and ended with resignation letters, citing stress or different career paths or, in one memorable case, spiritual incompatibility with the household energy. The last one had lasted 6 weeks before Mark found her crying in the kitchen, overwhelmed by the silence and the weight of caring for a child whose needs she didn't understand. Mrs. Chen, his head of household, had suggested he try again. A deaf child needs consistency, Mr. Cleary. She needs someone who will commit to learning her language, her needs. Mark had stared at his laptop screen, cursor blinking in the job posting template. Nanny needed for special needs child, $28 per hour, must be patient, experienced with deaf children, willing to learn sign language, discretion essential. He'd added one more line before posting it. No false hope, no miracle cures, no promises you can't keep. Then he'd clicked post and gone back to watching his daughter through the reflection in the glass, building her silent towers, touching her ear, trapped in a world he couldn't buy her out of. The penthouse cost $8.5 million. The art on the walls represented decades of investment. The view stretched across one of the most expensive zip codes in America. But Mark Cleary, tech billionaire, financial genius, master of pattern recognition, would have traded it all for the sound of his daughter's voice saying, "Daddy, just one more time." He finished his coffee and set the cup down on a side table that cost more than most people's cars. Tomorrow, the applications would start coming in. Another nanny, another person who would try and fail and eventually leave. Mark had stopped believing in miracles around the same time the doctors stopped pretending they had answers. He didn't know that the miracle was already on its way, carrying $127,000 in student debt and a pair of sterilized eyebrow tweezers in her purse. The blazer was borrowed from Ashley's former roommate, a corporate attorney who'd made it out of University of Florida and into the kind of life where blazers were something you owned multiple versions of. It was slightly too big in the shoulders, and Ashley kept tugging at the sleeves as she stood in the gleaming lobby of the Fisher Island building, waiting for the elevator that would take her to the 47th floor. The marble under her feet probably cost more per square foot than her monthly rent. The doorman had looked at her twice, clearly calculating whether she belonged here or was lost. Her phone buzzed. Another email from Navient. Subject line, "Your payment is overdue." She didn't open it. She knew exactly how overdue it was. $127,000 in student loan debt accumulated over 3.5 years of nursing school that had ended without a degree, without even the ability to sit for her licensing exam. 3.5 years of a 4.0 GPA, of clinical rotations where attending physicians had told her she had the instincts, of late nights memorizing pharmacology and anatomy, all of it ending the day her mother's oncologist had used the words stage 4 and palliative care in the same sentence. The elevator doors opened with a whisper. Ashley stepped inside and pressed 47, watching her reflection in the polished brass. She looked tired. She was tired. The last job had been at an urgent care clinic as a medical assistant, not a nurse, never allowed to call herself a nurse, making $16 an hour and watching actual nurses do the work she'd been trained for but couldn't legally perform. Before that, a home health aide position that had paid $14.50 and required her to help elderly patients with tasks that made her nursing training feel like a cruel joke. Before that, retail. Before that, the long, dark 2 years of watching her mother die by inches while the medical bills piled up like accusations. The elevator doors opened onto a private vestibule. A woman stood waiting, her posture so erect it looked painful. She was probably 60, Chinese, wearing a black dress that was simultaneously understated and clearly expensive. Her expression held the kind of professional neutrality that Ashley recognized from hospital administrators, the look of someone who'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. "Miss Matson?" The woman's voice was crisp, accentless. "Yes, Mrs. Chen? Follow me, please." The penthouse was exactly what Ashley had expected, and somehow more. Not in the sense of luxury she'd expected luxury, but in the sense of emptiness, All this space, all this money, all this carefully curated beauty, and it felt like a museum after hours. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors. Somewhere in the distance, Ashley could hear the hum of expensive air conditioning, maintaining perfect climate control for art that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Mrs. Chen led her to an office overlooking the bay. The desk was glass and chrome, minimalist in the way that only truly expensive furniture could be. On it sat a stack of folders at least 8 inches thick. Medical files, Ashley recognized immediately. She'd spent enough time in hospitals to know the look of accumulated specialist reports. "Please sit." Mrs. Chen gestured to a chair that looked like it belonged in a modern art exhibit. Ashley sat, resisting the urge to check if her shoes had tracked dirt on the pristine floor. "I've reviewed your application," Mrs. Chen began, opening a slim folder, Ashley's folder, noticeably thinner than the medical files. "You have an unusual background. 3.5 years of nursing school at University of Florida, 4.0 GPA, clinical rotations in pediatrics, oncology, and emergency medicine. Excellent references from your clinical instructors." She paused, looking up. "But no degree, no license. Can you explain why you left school so close to graduation?" Ashley had prepared for this question. She'd practiced the answer in her car on the drive from her studio apartment in Kendall, rehearsing the tone factual, not emotional. Don't cry. Don't make excuses. Just state the facts. "My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer in my final semester. She didn't have adequate insurance. I took a leave of absence to care for her and manage her treatment. She passed away 2 years ago. By that point, I'd accumulated significant debt from her medical bills and couldn't afford to return to complete my degree." Mrs. Chen's expression didn't change. "I see. And your most recent employment was as a medical assistant at an urgent care clinic in Hialeah?" "Yes, ma'am, making $16 per hour." "Yes, ma'am." Ashley felt heat creep up her neck. The implied question was obvious. Why are you qualified to care for a billionaire's special needs child when you're currently making minimum wage? Mrs. Chen closed the folder. "Miss Matson, I'm going to be direct with you because Mr. Cleary values directness. Cheryl is a profoundly deaf 7-year-old child who has been examined by the finest medical specialists in the world. She requires a caregiver who understands her condition, can communicate with her using sign language, and can manage her daily needs with patience and consistency. She does not need someone who will attempt to diagnose her, treat her, or second-guess the conclusions of doctors at Massachusetts Eye and Ear, Munich's Premier Clinic, or Johns Hopkins." Ashley blinked. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. We've had issues with previous nannies who thought they knew better than the specialists. One insisted Cheryl just needed energy healing. Another tried to feed her high doses of vitamin B12, claiming it would regenerate nerve tissue. A third contacted a journalist about Cheryl's condition without permission, suggesting Mr. Cleary wasn't doing enough to help his daughter." Mrs. Chen's eyes were hard. Mr. Cleary values discretion above all else. Cheryl's condition is not a topic for discussion with outsiders, especially not social media. And under no circumstances are you to attempt any interventions. Is that clear? "Crystal clear," Ashley said, her nursing training screaming at her even as she said it. "No interventions, no second-guessing, just caregiving." She glanced at the medical files again, 8 inches thick, 4 years of specialists. She wondered if anyone had actually read all of them, or if they were just accumulated proof of money spent and hope exhausted. "The position pays $28 per hour, Mrs. Chen continued. "You'll work Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., with occasional evenings or weekends if Mr. Cleary has business commitments. You'll be responsible for Cheryl's daily care, meals, activities, and educational support. She has a sign language tutor who comes 3 times a week and a speech therapist twice a week. You'll coordinate with them. Do you know ASL, basic conversational ASL from my pediatric rotation? I can learn more. You'll need to." Mrs. Chen stood. "Before we discuss further details, would you like to meet Cheryl? I find it's important for candidates to understand what they're committing to." Ashley stood as well, smoothing her borrowed blazer. "Yes, I'd like that very much." They walked through the penthouse in silence. Ashley caught glimpses of rooms through open doorways, a kitchen that looked like it had never been cooked in, a living room with furniture too perfect to sit on, floor-to-ceiling windows everywhere, flooding the space with Miami sunlight that somehow made the emptiness more pronounced. This was a home that had forgotten how to be lived in. Mrs. Chen stopped outside a closed door. Cheryl doesn't know you're coming. I don't introduce her to candidates unless I think they're serious contenders. She opened the door. The child's bedroom was different from the rest of the penthouse. It was actually lived in. Toys scattered across the floor, drawings taped to walls, a small table covered in colored markers and paper. And in the center of it all, sitting cross-legged on a plush rug, was a little girl with dark curls pulled into a ponytail, wearing a purple dress, playing with a set of dolls. She didn't look up when the door opened. No reaction to the sound. Ashley watched her, and something in her chest tightened. The child was arranging the dolls in what looked like a family scene, mother, father, child, moving them with careful deliberation. And as she played, every 15 or 20 seconds, her right hand would leave the dolls and go to her right ear. Not just touching it, tugging at it. The gesture had purpose, intensity. The child's face would scrunch slightly when she did it, a micro-expression of discomfort or frustration. Ashley had seen that gesture before, not the unconscious ear touching of someone with a nervous habit. This was different. This was the gesture of someone trying to reach something they could feel but couldn't access. Her mind went immediately to a clinical rotation 2 years ago. Pediatric emergency room, a 3-year-old who'd been tugging at her ear for days. The parents had thought it was an ear infection. The pediatrician had prescribed antibiotics. Ashley had been the one to suggest carefully, deferentially, because she was just a nursing student, that maybe they should look with an otoscope under magnification. The attending had humored her. They'd found a Lego piece lodged in the ear canal, so deep and impacted it had been missed on a previous exam. Cheryl, Mrs. Chen said, stepping into the room and waving to get the child's attention. The girl looked up, her face brightening. Mrs. Chen signed something. Ashley caught the signs for friend and meet and gestured toward Ashley. Cheryl waved shyly. Ashley waved back, smiling. The child was beautiful, dark eyes like her father's, delicate features, and that heartbreaking gesture she kept making to her ear. Tug, wince, release. Tug, wince, release. Ashley knelt down to be at the child's eye level. She signed, "Hello, my name is Ashley," slowly, carefully, hoping she was getting it right. Cheryl giggled at her signing, probably at Ashley's terrible ASL accent, and signed something back too quickly for Ashley to follow. "She says your signing is funny but nice," Mrs. Chen translated. Ashley grinned. "Tell her she's absolutely right. I'm terrible at it. But I'd like to learn better." As Mrs. Chen translated, Ashley watched Cheryl's right hand go to her ear again. This time, Ashley saw the slight trace of redness on the child's fingertip when she pulled away. Had she been scratching? Digging? Ashley's nursing training was screaming now. Foreign body impaction. It fits. The sudden onset at age 3, classic age for children inserting objects in their ears. The compulsive touching. The apparent total hearing loss, a complete blockage, could mimic nerve damage on standard hearing tests if the object was pressing against the tympanic membrane. And the most damning detail, if the object had calcified in place over 4 years, standard otoscopic exams might not see it clearly. It would just look like cerumen, like normal ear canal obstruction, easily dismissed as clinically insignificant. She thought of those 8 inches of medical files on Mrs. Chen's desk. Had anyone actually looked? Really looked? Or had they all just assumed that a child from a billionaire family would have already received the best care? That surely someone else had checked the obvious things. Ashley stood, her decision forming even as every financial instinct screamed at her to shut up, take the job, collect the $28 an hour she desperately needed. "Mrs. Chen," she said carefully, "I have a question. Has anyone checked for foreign body impaction?" The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Mrs. Chen's expression went from neutral to glacial. "Miss Matson, Cheryl has been examined by the finest ENT specialists in the world. Dr. Heinrich Volker in Munich, the team at Massachusetts, eye and ear, specialists at Johns Hopkins. Are you suggesting they all missed something?" Ashley's mouth went dry. She could feel the job slipping away, could feel the $28 an hour evaporating, could see herself back at the urgent care clinic or worse. But she couldn't unsee what she'd seen. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just asking if you're suggesting that you, with your unfinished nursing degree and your $16 an hour medical assistant experience, know better than doctors who have examined Cheryl with equipment and expertise you can't begin to comprehend, then this position isn't for you. Ashley felt her face flush. I apologize. I didn't mean to. Mr. Cleary has spent 4 years and more money than you'll earn in your lifetime searching for answers. Do you really think no one has checked the obvious things? No, of course not. I'm sorry. Ashley forced herself to meet Mrs. Chen's eyes. I spoke out of turn. Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. Behind them, Cheryl had gone back to her dolls. Oblivious to the tension in the room, her small hand went to her ear again. Tug, wince, release. Can you start Monday? Mrs. Chen asked. Ashley blinked. Yes, absolutely. 8 a.m. sharp. I'll have an ASL textbook and Cheryl's daily schedule ready for you. Remember what I said about interventions, Miss Matson. Your job is to care for her, not cure her. Understood? Understood, Ashley said. But as she left the penthouse 20 minutes later, employment contract signed, her borrowed blazer feeling less borrowed and more like armor, she couldn't stop thinking about that gesture. That purposeful, desperate, painful gesture. She'd taken the job. She'd keep quiet. She'd follow the rules. But she wouldn't stop watching that ear. The first week, Ashley learned Cheryl's rhythms. The child woke at 7:15 every morning, padding into the kitchen in her pajamas, always touching her right ear as she walked. Breakfast was cereal with sliced strawberries, arranged in a specific pattern. Strawberries around the edge of the bowl, never mixed in. She liked to draw after breakfast, sprawling on the floor of her room with markers, creating elaborate scenes of families and houses and trees with faces. She didn't like loud colors. Reds and oranges stayed in the box. She preferred blues and purples and soft greens. By the second week, they developed their own language. Ashley's ASL was improving, but they relied more on exaggerated facial expressions, simple gestures, drawings passed back and forth like notes in class. Ashley would draw a sun with a smile, point to the window, raise her eyebrows in question. Want to go outside? Cheryl would nod or shake her head, sometimes drawing her own response, a stick figure of herself on the balcony or inside reading a book. It was during the second week that Ashley tried the speaker experiment. She'd brought in a small Bluetooth speaker from home, nothing expensive, and placed it on the floor of Cheryl's room. She pulled up a playlist of songs with heavy bass lines, hip-hop, electronic music, anything with a beat you could feel in your chest. Then she took Cheryl's hand and placed it flat on top of the speaker. The child's eyes went wide when the bass hit. Not at the sound, she couldn't hear it, but at the vibration. Her whole face lit up with wonder. She pressed her other hand to the speaker, feeling the rhythm pulse through her palms. Then she stood up and pressed her bare foot against it, laughing silently as the vibrations traveled up her leg. Ashley watched, her clinical mind cataloging every response. Cheryl could feel the vibrations. More than that, she could distinguish between different bass patterns, moving her hands and feet to follow the rhythm. When Ashley changed songs, Cheryl would pause, adjusting to the new pattern. When Ashley turned the volume down, Cheryl would lean closer to the speaker, chasing the sensation. This wasn't the response of someone with complete neurological deafness. This was someone with intact neural pathways who simply wasn't receiving auditory input. Ashley started testing other things, carefully, casually, in ways that wouldn't alert Mrs. Chen or Mark during his brief evening appearances. She'd clap near Cheryl's left ear, nothing. Near her right ear, nothing. But if she created a sudden vibration, stomping on the floor, slamming a book on a table, Cheryl would startle. Not from sound, but from the physical sensation traveling through surfaces. More telling, light touch. Ashley began incorporating gentle face touching into their play, a kind of tactile communication. When she touched Cheryl's left cheek, near the left ear, the child would sometimes tilt her head, a micro-response that suggested some awareness of proximity to that side. When she touched near the right ear, Cheryl would often flinch or pull away, a reflexive protection of something painful. The right ear, always the right ear. 3 weeks in, Ashley made a decision that violated every boundary Mrs. Chen had set. It was past midnight on a Tuesday. Mark was in New York on business. Mrs. Chen had left at 8 p.m. as usual. Cheryl was asleep in her room, her nightlight casting soft shadows on walls covered in her drawings. Ashley should have been in the guest room Mark had designated for her on overnight shifts. Instead, she was standing in his study, staring at the filing cabinet that held Cheryl's medical records. The lock wasn't complicated, a basic key lock that Ashley jimmied open with a bobby pin, a skill she'd learned in college that had seemed useless until this moment. The cabinet drawer slid open with a whisper of metal on metal. Inside, organized with the kind of precision that spoke to Mrs. Chen's influence, were folders, dozens of them, each labeled with a date and a location. Munich 2022, Boston 2023, Los Angeles 2023, Johns Hopkins 2024. Ashley pulled out the thickest folder, Munich, and spread its contents across Mark's glass desk. The overhead lights were off. She worked by the glow of her phone flashlight, hyper-aware that what she was doing could get her fired, possibly arrested, definitely sued. But she couldn't unsee Cheryl's gesture, couldn't unhear her nursing professor's voice from years ago. Trust your assessment. If something doesn't make sense, keep looking until it does. The Munich file was comprehensive. Audiometry tests showing profound bilateral hearing loss, tympanometry showing abnormal middle ear function, MRI scans of the brain and auditory pathways, all apparently normal. CT scans of the temporal bones showing. Ashley stopped. She zoomed in on the CT scan image, a cross-section of Cheryl's skull at the level of the ear canals. The left side was clear. The right side showed the expected anatomy, the ear canal, the tympanic membrane, the ossicles of the middle ear. But there in the ear canal itself was a small, dense shadow. Not large, maybe a few millimeters, but distinctly denser than the surrounding tissue. She flipped to the radiologist's report. Her phone flashlight illuminated typed text in formal medical language. Small, hyperdense focus in the right external auditory canal. Likely cerumen impaction or imaging artifact. Clinically insignificant given patient's bilateral hearing loss. Clinically insignificant. Ashley pulled out her phone and photographed the scan. Then she went through the other folders, finding more imaging. A CT scan from 18 months ago, same shadow, same dismissive note. An MRI from 2 years ago, harder to see on MRI. But there was something causing signal distortion in the right ear canal. Every report mentioned it. Every report dismissed it. She thought about Dr. Volker's $87,000 examination, the team at Mass Eye and Ear's $125,000 consultation, the Los Angeles audiologist's $45,000 devices. All of them had seen this shadow. All of them had labeled it insignificant. But what if it wasn't? Ashley carefully returned the files to the cabinet, relocked it, and went back to the guest room. She sat on the bed staring at the photo on her phone, her nursing training warring with disbelief. She thought of reaching out to her former professors, the ones who'd written her letters of recommendation, who'd told her she had the instincts. But most of them had moved on, and she'd lost touch during her mother's illness in the aftermath. Except one. Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, as far as Ashley knew, who'd taught her pediatric nursing course, and had later completed an MD, specializing in otolaryngology. Ashley had seen a Facebook post about Sarah's new practice in Gainesville just a few months ago. They'd been friendly once, in that student-teacher way, close enough for Ashley to have cried in her office when she'd had to drop out. At 1:30 a.m., Ashley composed a message. She kept it anonymous, creating a burner email address, stripping all metadata from the photo. She wrote, "Dr. Chen, I have a question about a pediatric case, female age 7, diagnosed with bilateral profound sensorineural hearing loss at age 3. Multiple specialist consultations over 4 years. CT scan shows hyperdense focus in right external auditory canal, consistently labeled as cerumen impaction or artifact. Clinically insignificant. Patient displays compulsive right ear, touching, tugging, occasional pain responses. Does this warrant further investigation?" Attached, CT scan image. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then lay awake until dawn, her mind spinning through scenarios. What if she was wrong? What if she was seeing patterns that weren't there, letting her incomplete nursing training make her overconfident? What if the specialists were right and she was just another underqualified nanny who thought she knew better than Johns Hopkins? The response came at 9:47 a.m., while Ashley was helping Cheryl with a puzzle on the living room floor. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, expecting spam, and nearly dropped it when she saw the reply. Ashley, I know this is you. The writing style is unmistakable. This is not artifact. This is a foreign body, likely organic material that's calcified over time. Has this child been examined with an otoscope under magnification? Not just a quick look, a proper examination with a surgical microscope, or at minimum, a high-quality video otoscope? This should have been removed years ago. If it's impacted against the tympanic membrane, it could cause conductive hearing loss that would mimic sensorineural loss on standard hearing tests. The bilateral hearing loss would actually be unilateral conductive loss, plus the normal deafness we all have when testing the opposite ear with the functional ear completely blocked. Please call me. This is urgent. Sarah. Ashley stared at the message, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Cheryl tugged at her sleeve, pointing at the puzzle, but Ashley couldn't focus. She read the message again and again. Should have been removed years ago. She thought of Mark's face when he talked about the specialists, the reverence in his voice when he mentioned Munich, Boston, Johns Hopkins, the crushing guilt he carried over Elena's death, now compounded by 4 years of watching his daughter live in silence. She thought of the $670,000 he'd spent, a number Mrs. Chen had mentioned once in passing, saying it like it was a point of pride, proof of how much Mark cared. What if they'd all seen it and ignored it? The thought was too terrible to fully contemplate, but Ashley couldn't ignore the logic. A billionaire's daughter was a whale, a golden patient who would keep coming back for consultations, for experimental treatments, for follow-up scans. A simple foreign body removal was a 5-minute procedure. No repeat visits, no experimental protocols, no ongoing revenue stream. Ashley stood abruptly, startling Cheryl. She signed bathroom and went to the guest room, closing the door behind her. She opened her bag, a worn canvas tote from her nursing school days, and looked at its contents. Her wallet, her water bottle, a protein bar, a small LED flashlight, the kind they'd used in clinical rotations to check pupils. And at the bottom, in a small zippered pouch, her eyebrow tweezers. She'd started carrying the tweezers a week ago, sterilizing them each morning with rubbing alcohol from the penthouse's excessive medicine cabinet. She told herself it was just a precaution, the way nurses carried pens and notepads. Just preparation, just being ready, but ready for what? She couldn't perform a medical procedure on Cheryl. She had no license, no legal authority, no permission. If she was wrong, she could hurt the child. If she was right but something went wrong during removal, if she perforated the eardrum, if she caused an infection, if she triggered bleeding, she could face criminal charges. Child endangerment. Practicing medicine without a license. Mark Cleary had resources that could bury her in legal consequences for the rest of her life. But if she was right and she did nothing, Cheryl would spend the rest of her life in silence because the adults around her, the credentialed, expensive, prestigious adults, had decided that a shadow on a CT scan was clinically insignificant. Ashley pulled out the tweezers. They were small, precise, made of surgical-grade stainless steel. She'd bought them for eyebrows, but they were identical to the ones used in ENT procedures for foreign body removal. She looked at them in the light from the window, trying to steady her breathing. She wasn't planning to do anything. She was just prepared. If an emergency happened, if Cheryl was in acute pain, if there was bleeding, if something required immediate intervention, Ashley would be ready. She sterilized the tweezers again with alcohol, let them air dry, and placed them back in her bag. Then she went back to the living room, where Cheryl was waiting with her puzzle, still touching her right ear with that same desperate gesture, still trying to reach something no one else believed was there. Ashley knelt down beside her and signed, "Let's finish this puzzle together." But her eyes kept going to Cheryl's ear, and her mind kept going to the tweezers in her bag, just prepared, just in case. The crisis, when it came, would give her no time to second guess. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of perfect Miami day where the light off Biscayne Bay turned everything golden, and the penthouse windows became frames for a postcard nobody would believe was real. Mark was in Manhattan for a board meeting with potential investors. Something about blockchain infrastructure that he'd explained to Ashley in passing, and that she'd pretended to understand. Mrs. Chen had taken a rare day off her sister's birthday, mentioned once in the clipped tone she used for personal matters. Ashley and Cheryl were alone in 47 floors of luxury and silence. They'd been painting. Watercolors, which Cheryl loved because she could blend the colors with her fingers, creating muddy purples and greens that she'd layer onto paper with the focused intensity of a child who lived entirely in visual worlds. Ashley sat beside her at the small table in Cheryl's room, supposedly supervising, but mostly just watching the way Cheryl's face would light up when a color turned out exactly right. That's when it happened. Cheryl's hand, reaching for the blue paint, suddenly stopped midair. Her whole body went rigid. Then she doubled over, both hands flying to her right ear, her face contorting into an expression of pain so acute that Ashley felt it like a physical blow. The child's mouth opened in what Ashley knew was a scream, but no sound came out, or at least none that Cheryl could hear. Her small shoulders heaved with silent, gasping sobs. Her fingers clawed at her ear with a desperation that made Ashley's stomach turn. "Cheryl, sweetie." Let me see. Ashley reached for the child's hands, trying to gently pull them away from her ear. But Cheryl fought her, frantic, trying to dig something out with her fingernails. When Ashley finally managed to pull the small hands away, she saw it. Blood. Just a trace, dark red on Cheryl's fingertip, but enough to make every alarm in Ashley's nursing training start screaming. Protocol was clear. Acute pain, bleeding from the ear canal, child in distress, call 911, get her to an ER, let the professionals handle it. Ashley's hand actually went to her phone, muscle memory from clinical rotations taking over. But then she stopped. She knew exactly what would happen. The ambulance would take 20 minutes in Miami traffic. The ER would triage Cheryl as non-critical conscious, breathing stable vitals, and they'd wait. An hour, maybe two. Then a pediatric ENT on call would examine her, probably a resident, definitely overworked. They'd see the blood, diagnose otitis media or a ruptured eardrum, prescribe antibiotics and pain medication, and send them home with instructions to follow up with Cheryl's regular specialist. Nobody would look deeper. Nobody ever did. And if that object, that foreign body Ashley was now certain existed, shifted during transport, if the ambulance hit a pothole and it pressed harder against the tympanic membrane, if it perforated the eardrum completely, Cheryl could lose hearing permanently. Real irreversible damage, not the reversible blockage Ashley suspected. Ashley looked at Cheryl, who was crying in silent agony, her small body shaking. She thought of Dr. Sarah Chen's message. This should have been removed years ago. She thought of the $670,000 spent on specialists who'd all seen the shadow and dismissed it. She thought of 4 years of Cheryl living in silence while a simple foreign body sat lodged in her ear canal. So obvious that a nursing school dropout could spot it on a CT scan. And she made a decision that would either save this child's life or destroy her own. Cheryl. Ashley caught the child's face in her hands, forcing eye contact. She spoke slowly, exaggerating her lip movements the way Cheryl had learned to read. "I need to look inside your ear, sweetie. I think there's something in there that doesn't belong, something that's hurting you. I think I can take it out. It might hurt a little bit when I do, but then the pain will stop. Do you trust me?" Cheryl's eyes were wide, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Ashley for a long moment, a 7-year-old being asked to make an impossible decision, and then she nodded. Ashley picked her up, feeling how light she was, how fragile. She carried her through the penthouse to Mark's master bathroom, the one she'd only seen in passing, with its marble counters and lighting designed for perfection. She needed the magnifying mirror mounted on the wall, the one Mark probably used for shaving. She needed the best visibility possible. She sat Cheryl on the counter, positioning her next to the mirror. The child was still crying, still touching her ear, but she was trying to hold still, trying to be brave. Ashley's hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone and opened the flashlight app. Then she grabbed her makeup bag from where she'd left it in the guest bathroom that morning. Inside, in a small zippered pouch, were the tweezers, sterilized that morning with rubbing alcohol, like she'd done every morning for the past week. She'd told herself it was just preparation, just being ready. Now that preparation felt less like paranoia and more like fate. She took 3 deep breaths, the way she'd been taught before performing her first IV insertion in clinical rotations. Steady your hands. Clear your mind. Focus on the task. Okay, Cheryl. Hold very, very still. Don't move your head. This is very important. She angled the magnifying mirror and shined her phone's flashlight into Cheryl's ear canal. The magnification revealed what no handheld otoscope had apparently shown clearly. Deep in the canal, past the curve, pressing against the pale, translucent tympanic membrane, was a dark, irregular mass about the size of a small bean. It was surrounded by impacted serum and years of earwax that had built up around it, and what looked like dried blood from where Cheryl's frantic clawing had torn the delicate skin of the ear canal. Ashley could see why it had been missed. You'd need magnification. You'd need the right angle. You'd need to be actually looking for it, not just performing a cursory exam before moving on to more expensive tests. But it was there, unmistakably there. She opened the tweezers, testing them once, twice. The tips were fine and precise. Her hands had stopped shaking. Clinical mode had taken over, the part of her that had performed procedures on patients, that had drawn blood and inserted catheters and assisted in surgeries during her rotations. That part of her that knew how to set aside fear and just work. Okay, Cheryl, hold very, very still. She guided the tweezers into the ear canal with microscopic precision, angling to avoid touching the walls. The space was so small, the margin for error was nothing. If she scraped the canal walls, Cheryl would jerk. If she pushed the object deeper instead of grasping it, it could lodge permanently. If she perforated the eardrum, don't think about that. Just work. The tweezers reached the mass. Ashley could feel the resistance when they touched it, solid, calcified, embedded in the surrounding tissue. It wasn't going to come out easily. She'd have to work it loose, rocking it gently the way she'd learned to remove splinters during her pediatric rotation. Gentle pressure, tiny movements. Cheryl whimpered, her small hands gripping the marble counter, edged so hard her knuckles went white. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't move her head. She stayed perfectly, impossibly still. Ashley rocked the mass, left, right, feeling for any give in the calcified tissue. The tweezers slipped once, and she had to reposition, her heart hammering. She could see blood, fresh blood this time, where the movement had torn tissue. But the mass was loosening. She could feel it. Left, right, gentle pressure. Don't push, pull. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Ashley was aware of her own breathing, too fast. Aware of sweat on her forehead. Aware that she was performing an unlicensed medical procedure on a billionaire's daughter, and that if this went wrong, her life was over. But mostly she was aware of Cheryl's small, brave face in her peripheral vision, trusting her. Then suddenly the mass released. Ashley felt it give way, felt the tweezers close around it fully. She pulled, slowly, carefully, maintaining the angle, avoiding the canal walls. The mass slid out, bringing with it impacted serum and a small amount of blood. She withdrew the tweezers and looked at what she'd extracted. Caught between the tips was a small, dark bead, the kind from children's craft sets. The kind sold in bulk at toy stores. It was coated in 4 years of biological matter, calcified into something that looked almost geological. A tiny thing. A nothing thing. The kind of object a 3-year-old might stick in her ear at preschool and forget about. The kind of object that had stolen 4 years of a child's life. Ashley held it up to the light, stunned by how small it was, how insignificant. And then Cheryl screamed. Not a silent scream. A real scream, loud, shocked, piercing. The sound of a child who'd just heard her own voice for the first time in 4 years. The child's eyes went impossibly wide. Her hands flew to her throat, feeling the vibration there. She screamed again, this time in wonder, in amazement. Her mouth formed words Ashley had only ever seen her sign. I can hear, Then she whispered it, testing, like she couldn't believe it. I can hear. Ashley started crying. She couldn't help it. Tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with relief and terror and triumph. Cheryl was laughing now, making noise, testing her voice with different sounds, high-pitched squeals, low hums, her own name spoken aloud. Cheryl, Cheryl, Cheryl. The child was laughing and crying at the same time, touching her ears, touching her throat, spinning in circles on the bathroom counter in pure joy. Ashley was laughing too, holding the tweezers with their precious, terrible cargo, thinking about how she'd just committed a dozen violations of medical law and didn't care, couldn't care, not when Cheryl was saying her own name aloud for the first time and the front door slammed open with a bang that echoed through the entire penthouse. Ashley's head snapped toward the bathroom door. She heard footsteps, running, frantic. Mark's voice furious and terrified. "What the hell did you do to my daughter?" He appeared in the bathroom doorway, face white, eyes wild. He looked at Ashley holding bloody tweezers. He looked at Cheryl sitting on the counter, blood on her ear. He looked at the scene like he was trying to process a nightmare. Ashley opened her mouth to explain, but before she could speak, Cheryl turned to face her father and said, in a small, clear, perfect voice, "Daddy." Mark froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. He stared at his daughter like he was seeing a ghost. Cheryl said it again, louder this time, testing the word, loving the sound of it. "Daddy, Daddy, I can hear you." The fury drained from Mark's face, replaced by confusion, then wonder, then something like terror. He looked at Ashley, at the tweezers, at the small dark object caught between the tips. "She can hear." His voice was barely a whisper. "There was a foreign body," Ashley said, her voice shaking, lodged against her eardrum. "I removed it. She was in pain and you performed a medical procedure on my daughter." His voice was iced now, the fury returning. "Without a license, without my consent. You could have killed her. You could have perforated her eardrum. You could have, Daddy, listen." Cheryl laughed, pure delight. "I can hear myself talk." Ashley fixed my ear. Mark's hand went to his phone. "I'm calling the police. And my attorney. Mr. Cleary, please." "You were unreachable," Ashley said, fighting to keep her voice steady. She was in acute pain. There was bleeding. "I made a medical judgment. You're not a doctor. You're not a nurse. You're a nanny." He was dialing now. "You had no right." "Daddy." Cheryl's voice cut through the room, small and confused. "Daddy, why are you angry?" "Ashley helped me. I can hear now." Mark looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and Ashley saw the moment his fury cracked. The moment the reality penetrated, his daughter, who hadn't spoken in 4 years, was talking to him, hearing him. His hand with the phone dropped to his side. "Get in the car," he said, his voice tight. "Both of you. We're going to the ER. Now." The security alert had come through to Mark's phone at 2:47 p.m. Eastern Time, while he was sitting in a glass-walled conference room on the 53rd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, listening to venture capitalists ask questions about blockchain scalability that he could answer in his sleep. The notification was small, easy to miss. Master bathroom motion sensor disabled. He'd stared at it, his presentation frozen mid-slide. The penthouse security system was designed to be unobtrusive, but it tracked everything: doors opening, motion in rooms, temperature changes. The master bathroom sensor had never been disabled before. Why would it be? Mrs. Chen knew better than to tamper with the security system, and Cheryl couldn't reach the control panel, which meant Ashley had disabled it. Mark had excused himself from the meeting, stepped into the hallway, and called Mrs. Chen. No answer. He'd called again, still nothing. He'd pulled up the security app on his phone, checking the other sensors. Cheryl's room, motion detected 20 minutes ago, now clear. Living room, clear. Kitchen, clear. Master bathroom, disabled. The rational part of his brain said it was nothing. Maybe Ashley needed privacy. Maybe she was dealing with a medical issue of her own. But the part of his brain that had been waiting 4 years for bad news, the part that expected disaster around every corner, started screaming. He'd walked back into the conference room, apologized to the investors, and told them something urgent had come up. Then he'd called his pilot and chartered a private jet back to Miami. Wheels up in 30 minutes. The flight had taken 2 hours and 15 minutes. Mark spent them staring at his phone, refreshing the security app, watching the master bathroom sensor stay stubbornly disabled. He tried calling Ashley. No answer. He tried the penthouse landline. No answer. Mrs. Chen's phone went straight to voicemail. Right, it was her sister's birthday. She'd mentioned taking the day off. By the time his car pulled up to the Fisher Island building, Mark's hands were shaking. He took the elevator to 47, his mind cycling through worst-case scenarios. Ashley had hurt herself. Ashley had hurt Cheryl. Ashley had kidnapped Cheryl. Ashley had... He'd burst through the front door, not bothering with quiet, and heard it immediately. Laughter, a child's laughter, high-pitched, delighted, coming from somewhere deep in the penthouse. And then a voice. Small, clear, speaking words. Cheryl. 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 Mark had run toward the sound, his brain struggling to process what he was hearing. That was Cheryl's voice. He knew it was. He remembered it from 4 years ago. Slightly higher now, but unmistakably hers. But Cheryl couldn't speak. Cheryl was deaf. He'd found them in his bathroom. Cheryl sitting on the marble counter, blood on her ear, spinning in circles and laughing. Ashley standing beside her, holding a pair of tweezers, her face streaked with tears. The magnifying mirror was angled toward them. The bathroom smelled like rubbing alcohol and something metallic. Blood. What the hell did you do to my daughter? The words had come out before he could stop them, fury and terror mixing into something that felt like drowning. Ashley had turned to face him, and he'd seen genuine fear in her eyes, but also something else. Defiance. Certainty. She can hear, Mr. Cleary, Ashley had said, her voice steady despite the way her hands shook. There was a foreign body lodged against her eardrum. I removed it. And then Cheryl had turned to him and said Daddy and Mark's entire world had tilted sideways. Now sitting in an examination room at Miami General's ER, watching Dr. Patricia Ruiz, a no-nonsense ENT in her 50s, with gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen everything twice, examine his daughter, Mark still felt like he was falling. Cheryl sat on the examination table, chattering nonstop. She was talking about everything, asking questions, narrating her own thoughts in the way children do when they've just discovered the magic of their own voice. This light is really bright. Is it going to hurt? I can hear the beeping from that machine. What's that machine for? Can I press the buttons? Dr. Ruiz worked with efficient precision, using an otoscope to examine Cheryl's ear canal, then performing a quick hearing test with tuning forks and whispered words. Cheryl responded to everything, her face lighting up each time she heard a sound. Mr. Cleary, Dr. Ruiz said finally, setting down her instruments, I'd like to see the object that was removed, and I need you to bring me every imaging scan your daughter has had in the past 4 years. Immediately. Mark had brought the scans. He kept copies of everything on his phone, backed up to the cloud organized by date. He also had the object, the small, dark bead that Ashley had placed in a sealed plastic bag before they'd left the penthouse. He'd carried it in his jacket pocket during the drive to the hospital, unable to stop touching it, this tiny thing that had stolen 4 years of his daughter's life. Dr. Ruiz studied the bead under a magnifying glass, turning it over, examining the calcified material coating it. Then she pulled up the scans on her computer, starting with the most recent and working backward. Mark stood behind her, watching as she clicked through images. CT scans, MRIs, tympanometry results. Hundreds of images, thousands of dollars worth of imaging, all showing the same anatomy from slightly different angles. Dr. Ruiz stopped on a CT scan from 18 months ago. She zoomed in on the right ear canal and pointed to a small, dense shadow. There, she said. Do you see it? Mark leaned closer. The shadow was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Yes. What is it? That, Dr. Ruiz said, her voice flat, is the foreign body your nanny removed. It's clearly visible in every scan. She clicked through the other images, pointing to the same shadow in each one. Munich, 2022. Boston, 2023. Los Angeles, 2023. Johns Hopkins, 2024. Every single scan showed it. Mark felt something cold settling in his stomach. But Dr. Volker said the radiologist's report said it was cerumen impaction, an artifact, clinically insignificant. Dr. Ruiz pulled up one of the radiologist's reports and read aloud. Small hyperdense focus in the right external auditory canal, likely cerumen impaction or imaging artifact, clinically insignificant given patient's bilateral hearing loss. She turned to face Mark. Your daughter inserted this bead into her ear canal at approximately age 3, probably at preschool, given your timeline. Over time, it became impacted with cerumen and organic material, calcifying against the tympanic membrane. This created a conductive hearing loss that mimics sensorineural damage on standard audiometry tests. I don't understand, Mark said, though part of him was beginning to. How would conductive loss in one ear cause bilateral deafness? It wouldn't. But here's what happens in a standard hearing test. They test one ear at a time using headphones. They play tones in the right ear while masking the left ear with noise. If the right ear is completely blocked by a foreign body, the patient can't hear anything in that ear, true conductive loss. Then they test the left ear, but if the masking isn't perfect, or if the patient has already concluded they can't hear, they stop responding. A child who's been told they're deaf, who's been treated as deaf for years, who lives in a household where everyone assumes they're deaf, the child stops trying to hear. Mark stared at the scans, his mind reeling. So she could have heard this whole time. Not in the right ear. The blockage was complete, but the left ear was structurally normal. With proper examination and treatment, she could have had her hearing back years ago. Dr. Ruiz paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was harder. Mr. Cleary, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you need to hear this. You're what we call in the medical community a whale, a patient with unlimited resources. Mark flinched at the term. I'm sorry. Every specialist who saw your daughter knew that if they cured her with a simple 5-minute procedure, you'd be gone. No more consultations, no more experimental treatments, no more follow-up scans. But if they diagnosed her with a rare, incurable condition requiring ongoing experimental treatments, consultations, and monitoring, you'd keep coming back at $50,000 to $150,000 per visit. The cold in Mark's stomach turned to ice. You're saying they let my daughter suffer so they could bill me? I'm saying that any competent ENT performing a basic otoscopic examination under magnification would have seen this immediately. Dr. Ruiz tapped the screen where the shadow sat visible in scan after scan. The fact that none of them did suggests either criminal incompetence or deliberate oversight. I don't know their individual motivations, Mr. Cleary, but I do know this. Your nanny saved your daughter's hearing. If that bead had remained much longer, it could have caused permanent damage to the tympanic membrane. She acted with courage and skill. Mark felt like he might be sick. He thought of Dr. Volker in Munich, so confident, so thorough. The team at Mass Eye and Ear showing him slides of regenerating cochlear hair cells. The celebrity audiologist in Los Angeles promising cutting-edge devices. All of them had seen this shadow. All of them had dismissed it. Where is she? He asked, his voice rough. Where's Ashley? Ashley had been sitting in the ER waiting room for 45 minutes, a security guard standing nearby in a way that made it very clear she wasn't free to leave. She tried not to think about what was happening in the examination room, tried not to imagine Mark talking to doctors, showing them what she'd done, building a case against her for practicing medicine without a license. She'd violated every protocol. She knew that. She'd performed a medical procedure without consent, without credentials, without backup. If something had gone wrong, if she'd perforated the eardrum, if she'd caused an infection, if Cheryl had jerked at the wrong moment and the tweezers had gone too deep, she'd be facing criminal charges. Child endangerment, assault, maybe worse. But Cheryl could hear. That had to count for something. When Mark appeared in the waiting room doorway, Ashley stood automatically, preparing to defend herself. She'd rehearsed what she'd say. I saw the signs. I consulted with an expert. I made a medical judgment under emergency circumstances. But before she could speak, Mark did something she never expected. He knelt, right there in the waiting room, in front of the security guard and the triage nurses and the other patients. Mark Cleary, billionaire, tech mogul, master of the universe, dropped to his knees in front of her. "Miss Matson," he said, and his voice was breaking, "I am so sorry." Ashley stared at him, unable to process what she was seeing. "I almost had you arrested for saving my daughter's life," Mark continued. "I've been so blinded by credentials and price tags that I couldn't see the truth right in front of me. You did what million-dollar specialists refuse to do. You saw what everyone else dismissed. You had the courage to act when I—" His voice cracked. "When I was too afraid to question the experts. You gave me my daughter's voice back. I saw something that didn't make sense, and I couldn't ignore it," she said. Mark stood, still holding her hands. "That's exactly what makes you extraordinary. Ashley, I'd like to pay off your student loans. All of them. Every penny." Ashley felt tears starting. "Mr. Cleary, you don't have to. And I'd like to fund your completion of nursing school. Full tuition, living expenses, everything you need. When you graduate, and you will graduate, I want you to run a foundation I'm creating. Second opinions for children whose families can't afford to question their doctors. We're going to make sure no child suffers because their parents couldn't afford to doubt a diagnosis." Ashley was crying now, unable to stop. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll finish your degree. Say you'll help other children like Cheryl. And say you'll forgive me for being an arrogant fool who almost destroyed your life because I was too proud to admit I'd been wrong." From somewhere in the ER, they heard Cheryl's voice, singing off key and delighted, discovering the joy of making sound. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." Ashley smiled through her tears. "I forgive you." Mark pulled her into a hug, and Ashley felt 4 years of tension drain from his body. When he pulled back, his own eyes were wet. "She's singing," he said, wonder in his voice. "She's singing." "She is," Ashley agreed. "I haven't heard her sing since she was 3 years old." They stood there in the waiting room, listening to a 7-year-old girl discover music, and Ashley thought about the path that had led her here. Her mother's cancer, the dropped degree, the debt, the desperate job search. The moment she'd seen Cheryl touching her ear and known with absolute certainty that something was wrong. Sometimes the smartest people in the room were the ones nobody was listening to, and sometimes a pair of sterilized tweezers and the courage to act were worth more than all the prestigious degrees in the world. 6 months later, the penthouse on Fisher Island's 47th floor was unrecognizable. Not in the obvious ways. The Rothko still hung on the living room wall, the Basquiat still flanked the hallway, the Italian marble still gleamed under Miami sunlight. But the silence was gone. The careful, museum-like hush that had defined the space for 4 years had been replaced by something Mark had forgotten. A home could be loud. Music played constantly. Right now at 9:30 on a Saturday morning, it was Taylor Swift's "Shake It Off" at a volume that made the windows vibrate slightly. Cheryl's current obsession was Taylor Swift, and she played the songs on repeat, singing along with an enthusiasm that far exceeded her ability to carry a tune. Mark didn't care. He'd listen to off-key Taylor Swift for the rest of his life if it meant hearing his daughter's voice. The soundproofing had been removed 2 months ago. Mark had hired the same architect who'd installed it to tear it all out, the acoustic panels, the specialized drywall, the triple-pane windows designed to create perfect silence. Mrs. Chen had questioned the decision, citing noise complaints from neighbors, but Mark had been firm. This house had been silent for too long. Daddy Cheryl appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, her dark curls wild from sleep. "Daddy, what's a hater gonna hate mean?" "Taylor says the hater's gonna hate. Hate, 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 hate. But I don't understand why they hate so much." Mark looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing grant applications for the foundation. "It means some people will criticize you no matter what you do, so you shouldn't worry about them." "Oh," Cheryl considered this, her face serious. "Like how some people said you shouldn't let me eat ice cream for breakfast, but you did it anyway. That was one time, and it was your UN birthday. Every day is someone's unbirthday, Daddy. That's like 3 billion unbirthdays happening right now." Mark grinned. This was new, the constant chatter, the endless questions, the logic that was simultaneously 7 years old and somehow irrefutable. Cheryl talked nonstop, making up for 4 years of silence with observations about everything. Why was the sky blue? Why did Mrs. Chen's hair stay so perfect? Why did money exist if Daddy had so much of it? Why couldn't dogs talk? What did space smell like? Daddy, I'm bored of this song now. Can I play Cruel Summer? You've played Cruel Summer 8 times already this morning. Yeah, but now I know all the words, so I can sing it better. Before Mark could respond, the front door opened, and Ashley's voice called out, "Knock, knock!" Cheryl shrieked with delight and ran toward the entrance. Ashley, Ashley, I learned a new knock-knock joke. Do you want to hear it? You have to say who's there, though, okay? Mark followed his daughter and found Ashley in the foyer, being enthusiastically hugged by Cheryl, who'd launched herself at the young woman with the kind of full-body trust that children reserve for people they love unconditionally. Ashley had become part of the family over the past 6 months, not as an employee, never that again, but as something closer to a beloved aunt or older sister. The person who'd given them back their voices. She looked different now, less tired. The hollowness that had been in her eyes during that first interview was gone, replaced by something that looked like hope. She was enrolled full-time at University of Florida's nursing school, a full scholarship from the Cleary Foundation covering tuition, housing, and living expenses. She made the drive from Gainesville every weekend, ostensibly to check on Cheryl, but really because this penthouse had become a second home. "Okay, I'm ready," Ashley said, setting down her backpack. "Hit me with this knock-knock joke." "Knock, knock. Who's there?" Interrupting cow. Interrupting cow, whackage. "Mo-whoa!" Cheryl shouted, dissolving into giggles at her own joke. Ashley laughed. "That's a classic. Did Mrs. Chen teach you that one?" "No, I learned it from YouTube." Mrs. Chen says YouTube is rotting my brain, but Daddy says my brain is fine." "Your brain is exceptional," Mark confirmed. "Ashley, coffee. Please. I've been up since 5 studying for a pharmacology exam." They moved to the kitchen, Cheryl trailing behind, still chattering about knock-knock jokes and YouTube and how Mrs. Chen's face got all scrunchy when the music was too loud. Mark poured coffee while Ashley settled at the breakfast bar, pulling out her laptop. "How's the foundation coming?" "We're up to 47 cases under review," Mark said. "The team is incredible, 12 doctors so far, all working pro bono, reviewing cases that have been flagged for second opinions." The Cleary Foundation for Medical Review had launched 3 months ago with a simple mission: free second opinions for families who couldn't afford to question their doctors. The website had a submission form where parents could upload their child's medical records, diagnosis, and treatment plan. A team of volunteer physicians, mostly retired specialists, or those who'd become disillusioned with the profit-driven aspects of medicine, would review each case and provide an independent assessment. The first case had come from rural Georgia, an 8-year-old boy diagnosed with terminal brain cancer by a prestigious Atlanta hospital. The family had been told to prepare for end-of-life care, to make memories while they could. The Foundation's reviewing neurologist had looked at the scans and caught something the original team had missed. The tumor had characteristics more consistent with a brain abscess, a serious but treatable infection. A second CT scan with contrast confirmed it. 6 weeks of antibiotics later, the child was cancer-free because he'd never had cancer at all. That child, Marcus Williams, was coming to Cheryl's birthday party this afternoon. So were 6 other children whose lives had been changed by second opinions. A girl from Ohio whose incurable epilepsy had turned out to be a vitamin B6 deficiency. Twin boys from Texas whose genetic muscular dystrophy had been misdiagnosed Lyme disease. A teenager from Michigan whose psychological conversion disorder had actually been a benign brain tumor pressing on her motor cortex. 47 cases, Ashley repeated. That's amazing. 47 families who won't spend years wondering if the doctors missed something, Mark said. 47 children who won't suffer because their parents couldn't afford to doubt a diagnosis. Cheryl tugged on Ashley's sleeve. "Ashley, are you staying for my birthday party? Daddy ordered a cake that's 3 feet tall. Mrs. Chen says it's excessive, but I think it's perfect." "I wouldn't miss it for anything," Ashley said, ruffling Cheryl's hair. "What time does it start?" 2 o'clock. And Daddy says I can't play Taylor Swift during the party because some of the kids might like different music. But I think everyone likes Taylor Swift, don't you? I think you might be surprised, Ashley said diplomatically. Some kids like other artists too. But Taylor Swift is the best. She's definitely very popular. Mark watched them interact. This young woman who'd saved his daughter's life, and his daughter who'd saved her right back in a different way. Ashley had told him once, during one of their late-night conversations about the foundation, that Cheryl had given her a purpose again. A reason to finish her degree that went beyond just paying off debt. She wanted to be the kind of nurse who noticed things, who trusted her instincts, who wasn't afraid to question the experts when something didn't make sense. The party started at 2 o'clock sharp, and the penthouse filled with children and their families. Not the kind of children who usually occupied spaces like this. These weren't the offspring of Mark's billionaire friends or business associates. These were families from small towns and struggling neighborhoods, families who'd fought insurance companies and taken out second mortgages to pay for treatments, families who'd been told their children were terminal or incurable or beyond help, and now their children were running through the penthouse, playing games, eating cake, being beautifully, wonderfully alive. Marcus Williams, the boy from Georgia, was teaching Cheryl a complicated handshake. The twins from Texas were arguing cheerfully about which superhero was strongest. The teenager from Michigan was showing Ashley her college acceptance letter. She'd been accepted to nursing school too, inspired by the nurses who'd advocated for her second opinion. At 3:30 after cake and presents, Cheryl stood on a chair in the living room and called for everyone's attention. Mark felt his heart swell watching her, this small, fierce girl who'd spent 4 years in silence and now couldn't stop talking. "Hi, everyone." Cheryl's voice was clear and strong, carrying across the room. "Thank you for coming to my birthday party. I'm 8 years old now, which means I'm officially old enough to stay up until 9:30 on weekends." Laughter from the adults. Cheryl grinned, clearly pleased with her joke. "My daddy's friend Ashley says that sometimes the smartest people in the room are the ones nobody's listening to." She glanced at Ashley, who was wiping tears from her eyes. "She says it doesn't matter if you have a fancy degree or work at a famous hospital. What matters is whether you're really paying attention." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "For a long time, I couldn't hear anything. Lots of really smart doctors with really fancy degrees said there was nothing they could do. But Ashley was paying attention. She noticed that I kept touching my ear. She saw something that all those fancy doctors missed." Mark felt his own eyes getting wet. Around the room, parents were reaching for tissues, for their partners' hands, for their children. "So I'm really glad Ashley was paying attention to my ear," Cheryl continued, her grin returning, "because now I can hear how awesome my birthday singing is going to be. Ready? 1, 2, 3. The room erupted in off-key happy birthday, a chaotic blend of voices singing at different tempos and in different keys. It was terrible. It was perfect. Cheryl stood on her chair, conducting like a tiny maestro, her face glowing with joy. Mark caught Ashley's eye across the room. She was crying openly now, happy tears. She mouthed, "Thank you." He mouthed back, "No. Thank you. Because all of this existed, because a nursing school dropout with $127,000 in debt had trusted her instincts over the judgment of the world's most expensive specialists. Because she'd been brave enough to act when everyone else had been too afraid, or too comfortable, or too invested in the status quo." The singing ended in applause and laughter. Cheryl jumped down from her chair and immediately started organizing a game of musical chairs, because of course she wanted to play a game that involved music. Mrs. Chen appeared at Mark's elbow, shaking her head fondly. "That child is going to give me gray hair," she said. "You love her," Mark replied. "I do. Even when she plays Taylor Swift at volumes that violate noise ordinances." The party continued for another 2 hours. Children ran and played and made the kind of beautiful chaos that Mark had once thought his home would never contain. Parents swapped stories, contact information, advice about navigating the medical system. Someone started playing music not Taylor Swift, which made Cheryl pout until a remix came on and she started dancing. As the sun began to set over Biscayne Bay, casting golden light through those floor-to-ceiling windows, Mark stood at the edge of the living room and just listened. to the laughter, the music, the constant, beautiful noise of children being children. The sound of Cheryl's voice rising above it all, asking questions, telling jokes, singing along to songs she'd only known existed for 6 months. The penthouse that had been a tower of silence, a mausoleum of failed hopes and expensive art, was finally alive. Ashley appeared beside him, 2 glasses of wine in hand. She offered him one. "Thank you," he said, accepting it. "For what?" "For this. All of this." He gestured at the room, at the children, at his daughter. "For seeing what I couldn't see, for being brave enough to act, for giving me my daughter back." "You would have found another way eventually," Ashley said. "I don't think I would have. I was too invested in believing that expensive meant correct, that credentials meant competence. You taught me that wisdom doesn't come with a price tag." He paused. "How's school?" "Exhausting. Wonderful. Terrifying." She smiled. "I'm top of my class in pediatric assessment. Turns out all those years of doubt were good for something. I question everything now. Drive my professors crazy. Good. The medical world needs more people who question everything." They stood in comfortable silence, watching Cheryl organize an impromptu talent show where the main talent seemed to be who could make the silliest face. "Mark," Ashley said quietly, "do you ever think about how different things would be if I'd just kept quiet? If I'd taken the job and followed the rules?" "Every day," Mark admitted, "and every day I'm grateful you didn't. I broke every protocol. I violated medical ethics. I could have seriously hurt her, but you didn't. You saved her. Still." Ashley took a sip of wine. "Sometimes I wake up at 3 in the morning and think about all the ways it could have gone wrong. So do I. And then I hear Cheryl singing in her room, or asking me 17 questions about how clouds work, or telling me about her day in exhaustive detail. And I remember that it didn't go wrong. It went exactly right." Across the room, Cheryl was demonstrating her talent singing "Shake It Off" while standing on one foot. She was spectacularly off-key and wobbling dangerously, and it was the most beautiful thing Mark had ever seen. "The foundation is going to change a lot of lives," Ashley said. "You know that, right? Not just the children we help, but the families. The way people think about medical authority, the whole system. That's the goal. Make people understand that expensive doesn't mean infallible, that degrees don't guarantee correctness, that sometimes the person who sees the truth is the one everyone's been ignoring." He looked at her. "That's you. You're the one people weren't listening to." "Not anymore," Ashley said. "Now they're listening." The party wound down as the sky turned purple and the Miami lights began to sparkle across the bay. Families gathered their children, thanked Mark and Ashley, exchanged contact information, and promises to stay in touch. The teenager from Michigan hugged Ashley and whispered, "I want to be just like you." By 8 o'clock, only Mrs. Chen remained, efficiently cleaning up while Cheryl helped by eating leftover cake and chattering about how this was the best birthday ever. Even better than when she was 6 and got a real pony of lies. She'd never had a pony. But she'd decided that reality was optional when it came to birthday stories. Mark tucked Cheryl into bed at 9, reading her 3 chapters from her current favorite book, answering endless questions about the plot, listening to her theories about what would happen next. When she finally fell asleep, mid-sentence, he sat for a long moment just watching her breathe, listening to the small sounds she made in her sleep. He found Ashley in the living room, standing at the windows, looking out at the city. "Stay," he said. "The guest room is always ready. I have studying to do. You can study here. I promise Cheryl won't wake you up before 7. Ashley laughed. "That's a lie and you know it. 6:30 then. Final offer." She stayed. Of course she stayed. This was home now, for both of them. The penthouse settled into its new normal as the night deepened. No soundproofing. No silence. Just the gentle hum of a home being lived in, of a family that had learned the hard way that sometimes the most valuable wisdom comes from the most unexpected places. The gate between wealth and wisdom was finally open, and the sound that poured through was the most beautiful noise Mark had ever heard, the constant, unstoppable, joyful voice of a little girl who never stopped talking, and he never wanted her to stop. To all my amazing viewers, thank you. Every time you watch, like, and share my videos, you keep the echoes of love alive. Your support, your comments, and your time mean more than you know. This channel exists because of you. I appreciate you deeply.